So now it's my turn. So the title of my presentation is North Korean Identity and Political Culture from the mid-1960s to the mid-1970s. This is a German archival perspective. I've been doing this research in the past couple of years. For a background reading, I suggest two of my recent publications. Korean-German relations from the 1950s to the 1980s, and then also recently I co-edited a book. It's called Transnationalism and Migration in Global Korea: History, Politics, and 1910 to the present. And this was published just 2 weeks ago, and I contributed a chapter. It's called The Cold War Politics of the Korean Peninsula in the 1960s. So in this talk, I'm also adding the story over 1970s. So I will talk about the inter-Korean conflicts in the 1960s, and then Kim Il-sung's interest in the South Korean intellectuals and overseas Koreans, and then Soviet's support for Kim Il-sung in the 1960s, and then finally North Korea-China relations in the 1970s. As I mentioned, this research is based on the archives of the German Ministry of Foreign Affairs and also the Bundesamt, federal archives in Germany. So in the past, scholars in Korean studies predominantly use English or US sources, and alternative sources are also needed to provide different perspectives. So that's why I use German archives. And as the former East Germany and the West Germany were more deeply involved in Cold War global politics than any other European countries, German archival documents offer valuable insights for understanding the international political situation of the entire Korean peninsula, together with East Asian security issues. So there are two excellent studies. I mean, as a representative research, there are two studies on this kind of research. For example, excellent study done by Bernd Schaffer, and also there's a recent publication. It's called Misunderstood Friendship: Mao Zedong, Kim Il-sung, and Sino-North Korean Relations. This is done by Chiwa Chen and Yapeng Xia. But this study offers a new, my study offers new perspectives on North Korea socialist bloc relations in terms of broader international political issues, including Kim Il-sung's tactics toward the South Korean intellectuals and overseas Koreans, and the Vietnam conflict, and North Korea's new approach to the Soviet Union. So we all know that Korean peninsula is still deeply divided, and Germany is unified. And the scope of this presentation covers inter-Korean relations with respect to German archives during the 1960s and the 70s. North Korea, we can talk about the diplomatic ties between North Korea and East Germany, and they started the diplomatic relationship earlier than the other bloc. For example, the relation between South Korea and West Germany, and North Korea and Germany initially cooperated diplomatically and economically, yet their relationship weakened in the early 1960s due to North Korea's Juche ideology with a personal cult of Kim Il-sung and the de-Stalinization of the Soviet Union. So North Korea and China could not buy this Soviet process. And the and when it comes to the North Korea in the mid and the late the 1960s, the North Korean regime's diplomatic strategies after the Korean War appear to have been influenced by the international political circumstances and the tide of the times, but there were seemingly independent incidents that occurred both inside and also outside of the Korean Peninsula during the mid and late 1960s that have not been connected adequately, that this study also seeks to explain within an interwoven context. And especially after 1965, there were violent activities of the North Korean agents and the counter-espionage actions of the South Korean troops, and then this became the daily news in 1967 and in 1968. And how come this happened all of a sudden? And at that time, South Korean military security forces and police were also killed throughout the country. And this period is also marked by the North Korean attacks on the U.S. Navy intelligence ship Pueblo, and also U.S. reconnaissance airplane was also shot down. But then, according to the East European archives, including East Germany, Kim Il-sung's aggressive strategy of using armed forces against South Korea was linked to the military conflicts between the United States and North Vietnam in Indochina at the time. In other words, the aim of Kim's aggressive strategy was to take advantage of the Vietnam War situation in order to distract U.S. attention and the U.S. and South Korean military resources from the Vietnam conflicts. South Korea started sending the troops to Vietnam in September 1964. And given this successive dispatch of the South Korean combat troops to Vietnam, South Korean involvement in the Vietnam War most likely influenced the Kim Il-sung's strategy. And there was, of course, the North Korean internal factors for Kim Il-sung's military strategy because there was Kapsampa, there was a purge of Kim Il-sung's long-time anti-Japanese associates known as the Kapsampa, and he removed Kim Il-sung removed his competitors, and these sensitive political tensions were observed by the Democratic Republic of Vietnam's diplomatic envoy in North Korea at that time. For example, Hwan, in a dialogue with the East German diplomats in Pyongyang, Wang pointed out that the disappearance of some people in the North Korean Workers' Party was not an expression of ideological differences, but of the ongoing factionalism and sectarianism. So we see that there was a power game inside North Korea. And we also had access to the declassified material, including the conversation, a long conversation between Kim Il-sung and Erich Honecker, the former head of the East German state. And at the same time, during this time, Kim Il-sung was also interested in mobilizing South Korean intellectuals. So he says in front of Erich Honecker, when it comes to the South Korean Revolution, this is one of the most difficult issues because South Korea is occupied by the United States, and there was a turnaround. After Korean liberation, there were not very few, literal translation is there were not very few revolutionary forces, but the United States suppressed them. So we did not want to carry out revolution with the masses of the Communist Party, but with the Communist core, which bore a neutral name externally. So something like the Social Progress Party, Intellectual Party, and so on. So Kim Il-sung is stating that he was deeply involved with South Korean politics. And also here, as you see, Kim Il-sung maintains that North Korea supported this progressive party, which organized the uprising in 1960 in South Korea. This is surprising. So I'm talking about the April 19th, the student revolution. Another piece of evidence that the Kim Il-sung claimed to have supported not the working class in South Korea, but the South Korean intellectual group comes from his conversation with Alexei Kosygin, then premier of the Soviet Union, on February 4th, 1965, when he and the Soviet delegation were visiting Pyongyang on their route to Vietnam. Kim Il-sung maintained that his illegal organization in South Korea did not work in the workers' movement and that this workers' movement was very weak. According to Kim, this illegal organization, a Progressive Party, supported by North Korea, worked almost exclusively with the intellectuals in South Korea, and North Korea did not rush to pursue their revolutionary line across South Korea. So Kim Il-sung was emphasizing the importance of building an economy independent of the imperialistic country. So he stated that his independent politics were beginning to have an impact or effect on some intellectuals in South Korea. So there were some connections between Kim Il-sung and South Korean intellectuals at the time. And Japan is also related to this. Jackie, you mentioned about this as well. This was the time when Japan was allowing Chinese Koreans to move to North Korea if they wanted to do so. So from December 1959, Japan and the General Association of Korean Residents in Japan, Jocheonyeon, started sending the Chinese Koreans to North Korea. Many Korean residents in Japan and their family members moved to North Korea permanently from 1959 to 1984. In my document, 1984, you said 76. So in my document, it says from 1959 to 1984. Thus, many people were traveling between North Korea and Japan, especially during the 1960s. So with respect to South Korea, Kim Il-sung also emphasized North Korea's own efforts and the fraternal help of the socialist countries, which was especially important as a propaganda toward the South Korea. Thus, we can infer from the German archives that Kim Il-sung had a keen interest in communicating with and supporting the South Korean intellectuals in the 1960s. And at the same time, when it comes to South Korea, Kim Il-sung had also anxieties. And in case North Korea's anxiety over the gradual political consolidation, diplomatic achievements, and the economic stabilization of the Bakchani regime in the mid-1960s induced Kim Il-sung to obtain more aid from the USSR and adopt more aggressive tactics vis-a-vis the ROK. So in 1965, the Chinese Cultural Revolution started, and the Chinese regime wanted to interfere with the North Korean internal politics. They wanted North Korea to acknowledge Cultural Revolution and to adopt Maoism. So there was a conflict between North Korea and China at that time. So this time, the relation between China and North Korea became deteriorated. And then Kim Il-sung started resorting to Soviet Union. And then there were many communications, especially communications between North Korea and Soviet Union, especially after Brezhnev came to power, because the relation between Kim Il-sung and Khrushchev was so bad. And from 1967 on, Kim Il-sung started to test the South Korean and the US military security systems either by launching attacks on ships and planes or by sending armed agents and the saboteurs, including also guerrillas in large numbers, and so on. As I explained, the U.S. Military assets were also targeted and attacked. This North Korean strategy can be better understood when we carefully look at the East German assessment of the summit meeting between Kim Il-sung and the Soviet Union's leader, Leonid Brezhnev. Kim paid a secret visit to Brezhnev. Now we have the record of secret conversation between the two. So of course, Kim, given the bad relation, worsened the relation, diplomatic relation between China and North Korea, Kim Il-sung wanted to secure the long-term economic and the military aid from the Soviet Union. And this effort succeeded. And in the conversation with Brezhnev, Kim Il-sung expressed his view that the North Korean Workers' Party regards the so-called Cultural Revolution in China as an enormous stupidity, which also significantly affected North Korea and Soviets like this. Kim said that North Korea is, this is very interesting, this statement. North Korea is geographically very close to China, and there were many tasks to be completed in the construction of the socialism in Korea. Kim also added that the Korean Workers' Party, therefore, did not openly criticize the Communist Party of China, and it could not do it either. It was necessary for the North Korean Workers' Party to think about the future, because the Korean Workers' Party knew the insidious behavior of the Chinese. So this is his remark in front of Brezhnev. So Kim Il-sung's stance on China can be interpreted as highly diplomatic maneuvering in front of the Soviet leader. According to the East German assessment, the deterioration in bilateral relations between North Korea and China was primarily due to the impact of the policies of the Mao Zedong Rinbao group. Due to the politics of this group, real contradictions developed between North Korea and the People's Republic of China. Taking the East German assessment of the atmosphere of the early months of 1967 into consideration, one cannot exclude the possibility that the leadership of North Korea took a certain tactical steps in order to favorably influence the negotiations between North Korea and the Soviet Union in order to create a particularly positive impression in the Soviet Union for the sake of the economic and the military cooperation. So in the eyes of the Soviet Union, this was also a good opportunity for them to exert the influence on the North Korea. And then, of course, the Soviet Union wanted to further thwart the previous negative influence of the People's Republic of China in the politics of North Korea. So Soviet Union and China, they hated with each other. And the North Korea is taking full advantage of this relationship. And also, by providing North Korea with a strong economic aid, the Soviet Union hoped to create the possibility for positively influencing the balance of forces with regard to disputes with South Korea. Finally, it was in the Soviet Union's own interests to strengthen the personal position of the Kim Il-sung internally and externally at this time. Actually, Soviets did not like the personal cult of Kim Il-sung, but at this time, they didn't have any other option. So, of course, Soviets' support for North Korea, when it comes to the Soviet Union, the support to North Korea in the mid-1960s, we see that North Korea had multiple objectives. They wanted to achieve multiple objectives by having a good relation with the Soviet Union. Like this, North Korea wanted to modernize its defense forces. This was very important. This succeeded. And also for North Korea, it was necessary to gain immediate compensation for the failed economic and military aid deliveries from the People's Republic of China. So as I mentioned, this North Korea move was successful, and the enormous enormous aid packages from the Soviet Union for North Korea were secured. And of course, then Kim Il-sung must have felt confident after having secured such important aid packages from the Soviet Union. So the achieved results of the bilateral negotiations could mean a new stage in cooperation between North Korea and the Soviet Union. So given this background, we can also observe that North Korea, we can better understand why North Korea started to test the security alliance system between South Korea and the United States at that time. And then North Vietnamese also acted in concert with North Koreans in order to gain the military assistance from the Soviet Union to cope with the increasing US-led attacks. This is very interesting. But then North Vietnam was highly critical of North Korea at that time because North Vietnam did not support personal cult of Kim Il-sung. And North Korea did not regard the North Korean ideology as Marx-Leninism. So North Vietnam was arguing that Kim Il-sung's ideology has nothing to do with Marxism or Leninism. So the escalation of the Vietnam War, in which South Korean troops were also coordinating with the US military forces, could function favorably and advantageously for the North Korean armed strategy toward the US-South Korean military alliance on the Korean Peninsula. So now in 1969, Kim Il-sung started trying to improve the relation with China, and maybe he had also some, of course, concrete purposes when it comes to restoring a diplomatic relation with China, and the development of relations between North Korea and China was not continuous, and we see with the onset of the Cultural Revolution in China in the mid-1960s, relations between the two countries temporarily deteriorated sharply. We know this from the previous discussion. This I already explained, but then the normalization was not, for example, we can say it was not until Chu Enlai visited North Korea in 1970 that relations normalized again and gradually to an upgraded state. But the most significant event in the development of relations of North Korea-China in the 1970s was Kim Il-sung's visit to China in 1975, which marked his first official trip abroad in many years and the beginning of his visits to other countries. So why, especially in the 70s, in the early 1970s, there was ping-pong diplomacy between Washington and Beijing. And a couple of 2 days ago, Kissinger died. Yes, so Kissinger visited Beijing at that time, and then he started with this famous ping-pong diplomacy. And now we are observing the détente between the U.S. and China. So maybe this also influenced Kim Il-sung's tactics. And then the relation was not always good. China refused to support North Korea's request for a military solution to the Korean Peninsula reunification issue during Kim Il-sung's visit. So why at this time? Because Vietnam was communized. So this was a very important for Kim Il-sung, right? So Kim Il-sung might have thought that this is a good opportunity to secure Chinese support, Chinese military support for Korean issue. And also promised economic assistance by China fell far short of North Korea's expectation. And of course, Chinese leadership was concerned about the possibility of improving relations among the DPRK, North Korea, the Soviet Union, and other socialist states. Therefore, in the 1970s, China was making great efforts again to push the DPRK further away from the Eastern Bloc socialist states, or at least to keep it neutral. In the longer term, it continues to pursue the goal of including North Korea in its anti-Soviet policy. So this was the Chinese strategy. In the early and in the mid 1970s, the Chinese leadership utilized the North Korea as a stakeholder in the non-aligned movement, the third world, the country's movement, and in its interests in the developing world. And very interesting thing is that in the early 1970s, North Korea tried to maintain the balanced trade volumes for China and the Soviet Union. So 30% for China and the 30% for Soviet Union, respectively, and then 20% for socialist countries and the 10% for the rest of the countries, including the capitalist countries. So Japan, France, and the third country in the capitalist countries is West Germany. It's very interesting. So trade, we see the trade volumes between North Korea and West Germany. So the volume is increasing, right? So we see some disproportionate fluctuations of trade volumes every year. And West Germany has already been ranked third among North Korea's foreign trade partners in the non-socialist economy, followed by Japan and France in the early 1970s. And foreign trade development between Japan and France is relatively stable, but trades with West Germany are highly variable. Why? This disproportionate development exists because in the case of North Korea, there are contracts with Japan and France at the level of banks and company groups or foreign trade chambers, but transactions with West Germany are not carried out at such official contracts. But then around the mid-1970s, North Korea proved to be unable to pay the credits back to the Western trade partners. So now the state default is coming. And a very interesting point we found is that China's interest has been changing after since the Detang began between Washington and Beijing. North Korea is advocating, for example, for the withdrawal of US troops from the region and of course from South Korea. But China sees it as in its national interest to have the US play an important role in security as a counterweight to the Soviet Union in the Asia-Pacific region after the Detang. The presence of US troops in South Korea is in China's national interest, right? So officially in, how do I say, when it comes to the talk with North Korea, China says, okay, we support the withdrawal of US troops from South Korea, but in fact, the Chinese government is opposed to it, and the North Korea understands it. So I think this is the main point I made this point. Mm-hmm. And then there was also Soviet Union wanted to form some kind of collective security system in East Asia, just like Warsaw Pact. In the West we have a NATO system. So there was a Warsaw Pact in the East, in the Eastern Bloc countries, including Soviet Union. And then Soviet Union wanted to have some kind of a collective security system built in East Asia. But then North Korea was strongly against it. Why? If we have a collective security system, I mean, for the communist side, this would make the division of Korea permanent. So Kim Il-sung was against this Soviet Union's move. Okay, I think I presented most important parts of my presentation. In terms of time-wise, okay, thank you. So I'll just skip the conclusion part. Thank you. Thank you so much. I touched upon the historical and political issues, and maybe this has some relevance to the Chinese Koreans in Japan.
That's also what I kind of wanted to ask you um, in this scenario. What was the situation for the Japanese context within this trilateral or quadrilateral positioning? Because as you had mentioned, there was a huge movement of Koreans who have never been to North Korea, who never really, their ancestors were not from North Korea, but then still they really adopted Kim Il-sung's ideology of homeland, and also this particular propaganda that was motivated not only by the Zainichi Korean community, the Jocheonyeon, but also by the Japanese Red Cross, and then also by the United States, and then of course also by the Japanese government for them to repatriate to this particular region or these geographies. I wanted to ask you about your particular assessment.
Thank you for your question. When the repatriation of the Chinese Koreans to North Korea started in 1959, South Korean government was strongly opposed to this move, and but then there was no diplomatic relation between South Korea and Japan. The relation was resumed in 1965. So, but then even before this diplomatic ties were resumed, South Korean government was opposed to this move, and but then I think the Japanese government wanted Chinese Koreans to move out of Japan. That was a part of their interest. And at that time, there was no United Nations sanction, something like that, at that time. So Japanese invested a lot of money in South Korea as well after 1965, right? So at the same time, Japan also invested money in North Korea. So that was very, from today's perspective, it's kind of bizarre. But at that time, I think Japan had many options. And they had, in German, we say, Spielraum. Japan had more, what do you call it, more room to maneuver. You know, South Korean government at that time, they wanted to get more advanced technology from the Japanese side. So in terms of diplomacy as well, South Korea was very weak at that time. So I think their room for maneuvering was also limited when it comes to bilateral relation between China and North Korea.
This is just out of curiosity, but like you talk a lot about Soviet Union, China, and North Korea relationship in these documents, but do the East German government or diplomatic corps mention anything in detail about this repatriation of the Koreans to North Korea, like, or what their view was it towards that? Because I think in Germany they also had after the Second World War there are lots of forced, almost like unwilling repatriation of the German population in the Soviet bloc. Basically, they moved, and whether they saw, and do you recall any kind of mentioning of that?
The East German stance on the repatriation, not really. But then we found some documents from Jocheonyeon for East German embassy. So the Han Duck-soo, for example, the then head of the Jocheonyeon, he sent a couple of letters to East German embassies in North Korea and also in Japan for their support. For their political support. So East German, the Han Duck-soo wanted East Germany to support Jocheonyeon's activities. So it's a kind of maybe Jocheonyeon wanted to expand the alliance. East Germany. This is from yeah. Mm, mm. Yes. Then we need to dig into the former East German documents, diplomatic documents stemming from Tokyo. Yes. Yes. That's good point. That's good point. I visited German political archives in Berlin, and then some steps there told me that Japanese scholars are also visiting these these archives for Korean matters. So very interesting. So I was not the first. Just a couple of Japanese scholars. Okay, good. Yes. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your participation and also cyber attendance. Thank you.